Good evening. Hello. Hello, Matiela.
Thank you.
Good evening and welcome to the presentation of the Spanish translation of Matthieu Ricard book, Enlightened Vagabond, The Life and Teachings of Patrul Rinpoche. It's an honor for us that the social presentation of Padmapani editorial is with a master of the category and worldwide recognition as is Matthieu Ricard. Matthieu Ricard, in case that any of you doesn't know him, he's a scientist and a Buddhist monk, translator of the Dalai Lama, the author of international bestsellers such as Altruism in Defense of Happiness, The Monk and the Philosopher. He's also the manager and coordinator of Karuna Sechen, a non-profit organization that helps thousands of people in India, Tibet, and Nepal with programs of education and healthcare service. All profits from Matthieu's books, events, and photographies are intended to Karuna Sechen, and I invite you to visit their website, karuna-sechen.org. This event is a Rime event that has been made possible thanks to the collaboration of different people and different sanghas from all over the world, in special due to the collaboration of Sakya Dharma Family, Buddhist Door Global, and Padmapani Editorial. For those of you who don't know us, Padmapani Editorial is the sister publishing house of Padmakara, based in France. Padmapani was born in 2017 in Barcelona as the fruition of the blessings of Pema Wangyal Rinpoche and Jigme Khyentse Rinpoche, with the will to translate and thus preserve for Spanish-speaking readers the teachings of the Buddha, Dharma, and the wisdom of great masters. Padmapani is a non-profit organization, which means that all proceeds from sales go to continue translating, correcting, and printing Dharma books. That being said, I invite you, all of you, to visit our website. This is the home shopping ad. All those of you who wish to buy in our website, padmapanieditorial.com, will get the opportunity to acquire one of the available jewels, such as Vagabond Iluminado, others like El Sol de la Confianza, Bodhicitta from Pema Wangyal Rinpoche, or La Historia de Course. Let's make sure I miss nothing. One important thing, you will have the opportunity to ask questions in the chat box to Matthieu Ricard regarding his book or any question that you would like to highlight. You can write the question in the chat box, and at the end, the last 15 minutes, if there is time left, let's hope there is, no doubt, Matthieu Ricard will answer them. For those of you who just joined us, you have the interpretation channel at the right side of your screen, where you can connect with the Spanish translation or even mute the original audio, so you can listen only the simultaneous translation. That being said, I give the talk to my friend Jordi Roig, who will lead the whole conversation with Matthieu Ricard. And I invite you, all of you, to take a few seconds to dedicate the merits of this talk for the sake of all sentient beings, as well as the benefits that can derive from it. Thank you.
Gracias, Pia. Good evening, dear Matthieu. Tashirelek. I am very pleased to meet you. For me, it has been a great pleasure and an honor to translate your wonderful book, Enlightened Vagabond, and it has turned a magnificent experience. Matthieu, I think I have learned something from each of Patrul Rinpoche's stories that you included in this amazing book. Of course, I had read some of Patrul Rinpoche's texts, but certainly the deeper I went into this book, the more I became aware of the relevance that Patrul Rinpoche has achieved in the sphere of Tibetan Buddhism. So first, please, can you tell us who Patrul Rinpoche was and what was his vision of the practice of Dharma? How can reading Enlightened Vagabond help in our spiritual practice?
Yeah, so first of all, in the 19th century in Eastern Tibet and all throughout Tibet, somehow the Dharma was coming to a little bit of a difficult times. Many of the lineages were sort of vanishing. There had been some sectarian sort of disputes, but we could say that in the 19th century, there was a remarkable revival. And thanks to a few great teachers, many of them were from Eastern Tibet, and Jamyang Khyentse Wangpo, Jamgon Kongtrul the Great, and Patrul Rinpoche himself, then Lama Mipam, and Lothair Wangpo. So quite a few of those great luminaries. And even before, a little bit before, Shabkat Tsuru Rondel also was a very non-sectarian master who sort of very sort of feeling great sense of responsibility to gather all the precious teachings from the various traditions of Tibetan Buddhism. Just to give you an example, before Patrul Rinpoche, Jamyang Khyentse Wangpo traveled for 13 years on feet in all throughout Tibet, including central Tibet, to receive so many transmissions, empowerment, reading transmissions from all the 8 chariots of accomplishment of Tibet. Then he came back and shared all those empowerments, transmitted them to Jamgon Kongtrul, who put them in these 5 great treasuries, including the treasury of precious termas, which is 70 volumes. We just reprinted it at Session Monastery. So Patrul Rinpoche was very much part of that movement. Actually, he studied together with Khyentse Wangpo and Jamgon Kongtrul at Session Monastery for some years under Seshe Wangtrul, Mahapandita. And so, but then he, instead of, having a organized sort of setup, like Jamyang Khyentse Wangpo at Dzongsa Monastery was incredibly influential into gathering all the teachings. Jamgon Kongtrul the Great in Palpong, the hermitage of Tsaja Rinchen also was ceaselessly collecting all those teachings, arranging them in those 5 treasuries and his own collected works. But Patrul Rinpoche, although he did write wonderful commentaries, I think 6 volumes have been later gathered and printed, but mostly he chose to leave the monastery where he was as a very young boy. He was recognized as the incarnation of a Lama called Palge, who was in Jachuka. It's a very high area in eastern Tibet. It's about 4,000 meters. It's all nomads. And Patrul Rinpoche was born in a very, very little valley called Kormo Oyu. And I've been there, and there's hardly anything. There's 3 or 4 houses, and they're mostly living in tents. And the place where he was born is just marked with a little stone, not much. And it's a very nomadic area. But soon, even a small monastery, he left to become a wandering sort of practitioner, receiving teachings from all the great masters, especially his root teacher, among many others, Jime Gyaltsen Yugu, who was one of the 2 or the 4, depending, main disciple of Jigme Lingpa, Kunkien Jigme Lingpa, the omniscient Jigme Lingpa, who, of course, discovered the Longchen Nintik sort of mind treasures and had many times vision of Gyalwa Longchenpa. So the whole tradition of the heart essence was transmitted by Patrul Rinpoche. Just to give an example of the incredible endeavor, Jime Gyaltsen Yugu was living in a place very high, a completely desolated, bit wind. He didn't have even a proper house. He was living in a kind of the words of my perfect teacher. So in that sense, and also he was a student of Dokensei Yeshe Doji and many other teachers. But he kept on wandering, going around. He was incredibly learned, incredibly realized. Dokensei Rinpoche, one of a root teacher, said that in terms of realization of nature of mind, probably there was no one like Patrul Rinpoche in the 19th century. So then, of course, it's a very inspiring figure for Jimmy Kensei Rinpoche says in his preface, is that there is a perfect example to check all our actions, and the way of practicing in our days, is absolutely no concession to worldly activities, the 8 worldly dharmas, to anything else but the dharma. He would never have ordinary conversation, just dharma conversation, speaking of the life of the past master. Now, although we have some of his important writings, such as the words of my perfect teacher, but as terms of biography, there was 2 short biography written by his direct students. One by Dodrup Tempenima, the third Dodrup Shen Rinpoche, about 30 pages, and who, since early age, a student of Patrul Rinpoche. And then later on, Khenpo Kunsam Palden, who wrote that famous large commentary on the Bodhisattva Avatara. He was also a direct student of Patrul Rinpoche, of course. And he wrote, incorporated the first one and added quite a few things. But still, it's not very big. I mean, if we were to put it in Western language, it might be 40, 50 pages. So, but there was an incredible treasure of oral stories told by all the great masters. I heard of some of them when I first came to India in Darjeeling in 1967 by my root teacher, Khyalje Kangyu Rinpoche, the father, this very special father of Pema Rinpoche and Jime Khyentse Rinpoche, whom you know. He was an extraordinary master among all. And also later on from Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche and many other teachers. So as time went by, over more than 35 years, I used to write down those stories. When Khyentse Rinpoche will tell a story, I will immediately write it down in English because he was sometimes telling those stories without warning. So I didn't have time to rush and get a tape recorder. And also on one occasion when we were in Bhutan, for several evenings, I requested Nyushi Rinpoche, who had incredible memory, to tell those stories. And he told in great detail, and I could record them. And I could record also some other masters. So altogether, over more than 30 years, mostly, some of my most respected and beloved teachers, as well as in Eastern Tibet, when I started going around and asking all the great Khenpos for stories, recording them, sometimes in very, very difficult dialect. I had to, sometimes we'll go back to Session Monastery and 3 or 4 of us, even including Tibetans, who have to listen several times to make sure, what they were saying. So altogether, from 18 different masters, I could gather some stories. And then, so over time, I also visited many of those places, and some are very difficult to find in very remote area, forests, mountains, caves, and so forth. And I finally also, in the last few years, although I passed nearby but never knew, I could visit the descendant of his sister, who had kept very precious objects, like you saw in the beginning, some images of a little thing to boil tea, the prayer wheel, and a thing to blow air on the fire. So that was his few belongings that he mentioned, actually, people mentioned in his life, that were kept by the sisters, children and so forth. And this is the place where he was born, and also the place where he passed away, a very small valley in Zachuca. So altogether, after some time, it's okay, now it's time to sit down and put that all together, try to draw some maps, try to make sense of the story. How do they occur in his life because he keeps on wandering here and there. So using the written story as a framework, I try to put the stories where they seem to fit better in terms of time and some in terms of location also. If we are going, the stories take place in a particular place, or if he meets a particular teacher, I could look at the dates of those teachers and say, okay, this teacher passed away on such a time, 1945, 1845. So it must be at that time in his life. So the best I could guess. And so to try to arrange that in the timeline. But anyway, even this timeline doesn't really matter because each of those stories is an extraordinary teaching in itself. And also he left about more than almost 200 pages of spoken advice, which were written down. So this spiritual advice. So I tried to also translate a few of them, half a dozen of them, and include them among the stories of his life to give a flavor of his teachings. But of course, this is just a small contribution, but it was wonderfully inspiring to do that over time. And I'm so glad that now it's in various languages so that people can be inspired. And as you can see, when you read it, there's no concession. It's not someone who adapts to, Dharma is not thinking of particularly this audience, that audience. This is just the Dharma as it is, with no consideration for worldly concern, hope and fear. As you know, the 8 worldly concerns are gain and loss, praise and criticism, fame and obscurity, and pleasure and pain. So Patrul Rinpoche clearly had no consideration for that, only to share, guide a few dedicated disciples and students to the path of enlightenment with great humility, with incredible wisdom. And some of his other teachings are among the most profound on nature of mind and also on the preliminary practice. And even he was incredibly learned on the Prajna Paramita and so forth. And even if you look at the major commentary on Madhyamika, like recently, my dear colleague and friend, Woodson Fletcher for Pamakara translated the commentary of Mipam Rinpoche on the 9th chapter of the Bodhisattva. Very, very difficult. Very, to crack the nut of this, it needs a lot of study. But Patrul Rinpoche, Mipam Rinpoche said that actually he formally studied only once with the teacher. That was with Patrul Rinpoche when Patrul Rinpoche gave at the philosophical college of Dzogchen Monastery, Shiresingha. He gave for 7 or 8 days the teaching on this 9th chapter, and that was the base of that commentary of Mipam Rinpoche. When Patrul Rinpoche saw that commentary, he said, "Oh, that's what I taught at Shiresingha." But that's the deepest, most incredibly profound commentary on the 9th chapter. And, that's also show the magnitude of Patrul Rinpoche's learning on top of his incredible practice.
Yes, and really your answer and hearing about all those names and texts and all this endeavor is really touching indeed. I think now, Matthieu, it's a good point in time to dig deeper into your process of making this book, because you were telling before, and in Enlightened Vagabond, you tell how you collected these stories as they were told to you directly by some extraordinary masters like Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche, Ken Rinpoche, and many other outstanding teachers. At other times, the stories of the book were revealed by Tibetan nomads living in very remote areas of Tibet. Matthieu, do you have any particularly cherished memories of the moments of collecting these stories? And which story was the most special to collect?
Well, they're all special, but when sometimes I would find them, when I received from Khyentse Rinpoche and Nishiken Rinpoche, basically I was living there in Bhutan, Nepal, India with my great teachers. So over time, they would give those stories. So of course, those times were extraordinary, but that was my life also, to be with them, to be at their feet. But there are some occasions in Tibet, in some places where I didn't expect to find a story of Patrul Rinpoche, but I would mention to some old Khenpos or even young ones sometimes, do you have any stories of Patrul Rinpoche? So sometimes they will tell me a story that I knew already, but sometimes it was a completely new story I never heard. So that was wonderful, getting another one, and most inspiring one. But I have some fond memory. There was a very, very old Kempo who passed away now. Most of them now passed away. So it was the right time to collect all that, because the younger generation, sometimes they don't tell the story with that much detail. Anyway, so he was telling a few of those stories with such, he was a student of a student of Patrul Rinpoche, student of Kempo Kumpel. He was telling them with such a lively way and such enthusiasm that you really felt that he has heard them a few days ago, or he was there when Patrul Rinpoche was, describing what Patrul Rinpoche had done, and so that you felt that you were almost, present, the flavor of that. And so I even have a few videos of that, but of course it's it's a very tough dialect from Zachuka mostly. So those stories, finding new ones, and also I researched some in the other text, like in Adzom Drukpa's biography written by his son, Adzom Gyaltse Gyome Dorje. There are a few stories, about how Adzom Drukpa, this great master, also became student of Patrul Rinpoche. So, what to say? All of those are so, wonderful, inspiring, and so one I heard from Khenpo Pema Wongyal, who just passed away last year. It's the same name as Pema Wongyal, but he's a Khenpo from Gemang Monastery in Zachuka, a student of Khenpo Kumpel, who wrote the first biography. So you see, it's only two generations. And so he, in the cave which I visited in Zachuka, they say at one point at Drukpa, I'd heard of Patrul Rinpoche, so he went there, and he was already even young. He was quite a great Lama, and so, so he had already a lot of students, and he came with a big amount of tents, and so then he went up to see Patrul Rinpoche, pretending, to be just an ordinary monk. And so he sort of sat down in front of Patrul Rinpoche and requesting for some teaching about some yogic exercise. And Patrul Rinpoche would say, I don't know much anything. And so he said, could you come to my tent tomorrow? So Patrul Rinpoche came, and when he came, the tent was so beautiful. He said, well, that's not just a tent, that's the Buddha field of something. So sort of showing to Adzom Drukpa that, why do you live in such a luxury? So finally, he gave those teachings, but everything happened so simply. There are many, many wonderful stories. Like one time, Patrul Rinpoche was walking around, and then he came about an old lady who had just lost her husband. So she was walking very poor with 3 children. And so Patrul Rinpoche saw her, and she said, can I help? And they were wonderful. So they traveled together. He was going back to Zachuka. So he carried one of the kids on his back. The woman carried another one, and the third one is walking, and sort of begging food here and there. And so finally, when they reached the place in Zachuka, the lady said, you have been so kind to me. I lost my husband, and maybe we could get married. So, pardon me, I'm not sure. But do here, just don't again. And she thought, what does he has to do, this old beggar? And then she then heard that the famous Patrul Rinpoche was giving teachings on the Bodhisattva. So she said, oh, that's a wonderful occasion. I can go meet the master and, ask him to pray for my deceased husband. So then Patrul Rinpoche, after he left her, he went to the monastery, and before starting the teaching, usually he would never keep any offering. He would always leave it there, whether people give or not, he would never take anything. But that time he says, okay, now everything that was offered, tea and all kinds of foods and champa flour and butter, he said, keep everything. The people would say, why the Patrul Rinpoche suddenly wants to keep things? They say, I have a special guest, he said. So after some days, the lady came to receive a little bit of teaching and especially to ask prayer for her husband. And when she came in, she was so shocked. She saw on the throne that old beggar dressed in the nomad clothes, with the sheepskin and with the famous Patrul Rinpoche. So at the when people come to receive, to meet, she came and she was in tears and apologized. I'm so sorry. Not only I asked you to carry my child, but I even asked you if you would marry me. Just offer my confession. And he said, no, nothing wrong. You did very well. And by the way, and then he called the people there and said, okay, this is for this lady that hold those provisions. So he gave a huge amount of provision. So there are many, many such stories like that. It's of course so inspiring. Some story about his humble behavior, some story about his, how do we say, non-negotiable renunciation, some story about his practice. So it is quite, yes, most inspiring. So that's why also translating life stories. I remember the Khyentse Rinpoche told me when I was doing some translation work, he said, why don't you translate life stories? Because they can inspire people and there's no risk of being misused, like too profound teaching for people who are not yet ready for those teachings. So that is why, under Khyentse Rinpoche's guidance, I decided to translate first the autobiography of Shabka Todru Rinpoche, which is quite big, and then Patrul Rinpoche's life story, because this is something we can take as a model. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I think that reading those stories can definitely impel, inspire, and give life to our spiritual practice. I think it's very important. And Matthieu, do you like surprises? Because we have prepared a little something for you. It's a short video of Alaksenka Rinpoche sharing some words about you and your book. Let's watch it.
Okay.
So, today, as the great spiritual friend and monk Matthieu has compiled the life story of Patrul Rinpoche according to the oral tradition for publication. For this, I would like to offer my heartfelt thanks. At the same time, I would like to say a few words about Patrul Rinpoche's special qualities. Patrul Rinpoche was someone who acted without any pretension. In all his physical conduct, you could say, he acted unpretentiously. His speech was entirely meaningful. He never said anything nonsensical or meaningless. And his mind was free from bias, ordinary thinking, and delusion. Such were his remarkable qualities. When he taught, he would always attune his teaching to his audience, whatever their status. And he would only ever talk Dharma that was beneficial. He never indulged in self-aggrandizement or the belittling of others and so on. His teachings were truly incredible. Especially for me, the text called The Drama in the Lotus Garden, which I have read many times. In the past, I even memorized it. And this text includes reference to what are called the 6 crucial points. And if you are a Dharma practitioner, these 6 are very important. If you put them into practice, the text says there's no need for pomp or preparation, no need to set some future date, there's no need to travel in pursuit of Dharma. The Dharma becomes like your own body and limbs. When you need it, it's right there before you. And this means that at any time we can encourage ourselves, and if we really come to know the Dharma, it can have this kind of benefit. So to put it simply, his teachings are really outstanding. So, upon hearing about the publication of this book, I join my hands together and offer my heartfelt thanks to Matthieu Ricard again and again.
Matthieu, I hope that
wow,
you like it.
What a surprise. But you know, Zanka Rinpoche is probably in our time the closest we can get to Patrul Rinpoche himself. His life is just a perfect example of humility, renunciation, being learned, accomplished, and yet being almost like trying to become invisible, but his kindness and wisdom always shines. And but also he's a fearless, reminder to us of, how we can easily stray into worldly activities. And each time I was fortunate to meet him and spend some time with him, his mere presence and words are always a stark reminder of not to waste our time. And just seeing him is such a joy, and I feel so fortunate. I have not seen him for 2-3 years. I spent a few days with him in Hong Kong some years ago, 2 years, I think, not 3 years ago. He asked me to come and spend some time. And it was so extraordinary. And of course, some of the stories come from him as well. And so thank you so much for sharing this. It's such a gift.
Thanks. We are glad that you enjoyed it. Matthieu, let's continue with the talk. In Tibetan Buddhism, the teacher-student relationship is extremely crucial. And actually, these days, as you know, is a quite controversial topic. Matthieu, can you please explain what were the dynamics of the teacher-student relationship for Patrul Rinpoche? And since that relationship is extremely crucial, what is your guide to establishing a teacher-student relationship that is wholesome and fruitful?
Well, controversially, I don't think it was in Tibet. Maybe some occasions, rest of the world, when, the main, I think, issue is that all the great teachers and great teachings describe in immense detail, the characteristics of authentic teacher and the characteristics of those who are not authentic teachers. And they're very clear that we should be extremely careful before committing oneself to any teacher. And especially in the words of my perfect teacher, Patrul Rinpoche, but also in the commentary by Kangdul Rinpoche and other masters, or the Jigme Limba's Treasury of Precious Qualities. There's a whole chapter dealing with the qualities of the teacher, the defect of a wrong teacher, the quality of a disciple, the defect of a wrong disciple. And so there's no surprise that if you don't are not careful about that, then we get in trouble. But also, I think we should understand that there are different kinds and levels of teachers. There's a simple teacher who can teach you read and write. It's very, very kind, extraordinary kind, because they open the doors of learning for you. And they are in Buddhism, the teacher who takes you the basic of teaching of Buddhism. Then there's the teacher who gives you the refuge vows. Then there's the teacher who lets you enter on the Mahayana path by giving you the Bodhisattva vows. Then there might be a Kempo and a Bot that give you different levels of ordination, either the refuge vows or the 5 vows for lay people, or the vow of novice, nuns or monk, or the full vows. So giving you the transmission of the pratimoksha precepts. And then, of course, the bodhisattva vows will come with the bodhisattva precepts. And then there is the entrance in the diamond vehicle, Vajrayana, through the empowerment. So now there are different degrees of qualification of those teachers. I mean, a teacher who explains you the Dharma, his main qualification will be to be very learned and also to have an authentic life that is teaching, and his life is coherent. And then those who give the vow of the bodhisattva, of course, they should have immense compassion. And the root teacher is said to be the one who introduces you to the nature of mind. So then, of course, he or she has to have a full realization. Otherwise, what is he introduce you to? And then the Vajrayana teacher, becomes a very, very close and intimate spiritual relationship, because he's opening the door to all the vast teachings of the outer and inner tantras. When he bestows the empowerment, he becomes one with the deity. So you see, then the commitment from the disciple are not the same either. If you just learn some aerobics with a teacher, it's no big deal if you do it or not. No big consequences, no big benefit. But suppose you learn sailing around the world, or you learn rock climbing on a sheer cliff. So now it's a little bit more risky. So now if on the sheer cliff, you go with a guide, and halfway through you say, oh no, I'm not going to follow your advice, I'll go my own way. So what happens? You do all things wrong, and then you fall, and then in the fall, your teacher falls with you because you are roped together. So that's become much more serious. It's a life-threatening situation. So likewise, we should understand those different levels of teachers, different levels of commitment, and not do things lightly. Even in the teaching, it says the master should examine the student for 12 years, and the student should examine the right teacher for 12 years. Of course, nobody has time to do that, but at least they should examine each other for a while and compare with the teachings. So that's why His Holiness Dalai Lama says, please make sure that you find an authentic master, and then only you can put your trust. But once you put your trust, it's like the rock climbing example, then you have to trust, otherwise it doesn't work. If you decide your own fancy mind that you want to do this, to do that, it doesn't work. And also the risk, the benefits are immense, the risk are also great. So that's why. So mostly it comes from misunderstanding, because sometimes in the West, those centers are very open. So people come, they don't even know much yet about Dharma, and they hear someone is giving empowerment, so they go, and then later on they figure out that they're not interested, or they start criticizing. So that's, of course, has serious consequences. But so in Tibet, it was, traditionally people have some idea of what it is. But even if you look at India, before Buddhism spread to Tibet, the Vajrayana teaching were kept extremely secret. I mean, all the great Panditas from Nalanda, they were great Panditas. They were teaching Buddhist philosophy and practice, but their Vajrayana practice was extremely secret. And all the 84 Mahasiddhas also, they were only giving those transmissions to very, very few students. So in Tibet, it spread very widely, and people had very pure vision, great devotion in the master. So therefore, even though there had been some issues, but not much. Now, it's a different condition, different world, different times. So that's why we should be careful before we commit ourselves, and we should study the teachings and then see. And then, that's it. And hopefully not get into trouble.
Thank you so much, Matthieu. It seems that we are running out of time, but I would like to hear more about what you can say about some topics, because I'm sure that many people who are watching us right now are feeling, as me, inspired by your words. And I really think that your perspective, which mingles Buddhist wisdom with social engagement, at this point of time, it contributes a lot to the world. So in the wake of the various challenging situations we are experiencing right now in the world, what do you think, Matthieu, are the crucial issues that we as humanity urgently need to put into action?
Well, we should, of course, you know, the high way of the Buddhist teaching is loving kindness and compassion. So that's what we need more than ever. We need to take the measure of our common humanity, and so put the accent on benevolence, altruism, solidarity, helping each other. We should not fall into individualism. And also we should be responsible for other species who are co-citizens in this world and with the environment. So that's why the Dalai Lama speaks of non-violence against the human beings, non-violence about other species, and not violence against the environment. And if you look at, there's one lesson from the COVID crisis, that if you look at all the pandemic or the epidemics of the last 30 years come from viruses, they all came from unhealthy relationship to other species and what we call animals. There's 8 million other species. We are one among them. So either through encroaching on the wild environment, you know, the AIDS, Ebola, and it seems also COVID with the bats and so forth came in that way. And the other way is this completely mad and senseless and pitiless and merciless industrial raising of animals just for, you know, living out of their suffering and their death. And those industrial sort of settings, of course, breed lots of disease. So the avian flu, the porcine flu, all that came from there. So if you see, many of those recent diseases came from wrong, sort of not balanced relation with other species. So then we can take the lesson from that. And definitely, Patrul Rinpoche was clear about all these things. You know, his main teaching was compassion all the time. He said main thing is to have good heart. That's what the Dalai Lama says. My religion is that of good heart, and good heart should be for everyone. We don't have two hearts, one for human and one for animals. We have a heart or we don't. So compassion should know no borders, and definitely should not stop at the edge of our plate, especially. So that's why I think was one main teaching of Patrul Rinpoche is compassion, besides his wisdom. He was always incredibly compassionate. At the same time, you know, some people said, when we are with you, some people, we feel so drawn to you. Sometimes also we feel like a respectful fervor. Why? So then he said, maybe because you feel, you know, close to be with him because of, I asked one of the Khenpo Mongyal, he says, because of his great compassion, people feel so wonderful to be with him and don't want to separate from him, ever. But sometimes there's a respectful and fear, and it's because of this profound relation of emptiness. You know, it's not somebody superficial. He had no easy word for the worldly. So like that. And also his teaching reminded all the time. I just tell a last story, because one time he was coming by a tent of a nomad area. And then he asked whether he could stay for the night in the corner of the tent. And the mother looked at him and she said, oh, this old beggar, you know, he might bring us some sickness or something. And the daughter sort of begged and said, you know, please let him in, you know, he has nowhere to go. And she said, okay, you can sit in that little corner. And then she gave as a cover a very old skin filled with lice. And then so Patrul Rinpoche didn't say anything. He slept with that and put on his. And when they were going to sleep, those lice had migrated, and they went to also the mother found the lice on their body. So she told her daughter, oh, there's a lice on my skin. Please take that lice outside in a place where it won't die. No, she wanted to put outside, but try. So Patrul Rinpoche then raised his head and said, oh, if there's any such a place where we will not die, please throw me as well with that lice. So, you know, he was giving this guy's teaching all the time to all occasions. And so it's such an inspiration to read those stories and this life story. So the word, you know, in Tibetan, we use say namtar for life story. And namtar means life of perfect liberation. So it applies beautifully well to Patrul Rinpoche, Shabka, and many other teachers whose life story has been now translated, like Jamon Khyentse Chökyi Lodrö, Khenpo Ngakchong, and quite a few. Jamon Patrul the Great, Jamon Khyentse Wangpo's life stories have been translated. Of course, Guru Rinpoche's story, the Pamakatang. All these are being in translation, and they are extraordinary source of inspiration. Yes.
Thank you, Matthieu, for your wonderful answer. Actually, altruism is a quality that you often mention and that you crystallize in the project of Karuna Shechen. Please, can you introduce us to Karuna Shechen? Matthieu, what do you do, where, and how can the project be supported?
Yes, so, for many years I lived in the Himalayas, first in Darjeeling at Kangri Rinpoche's monastery, then in Nepal, then Bhutan, then I went 20 times to Tibet, 3 times with Khyentse Rinpoche, and many times with his grandson, Seshen Ramjam Rinpoche. So I was quite aware of the situation, what was needed in terms of education, health. But myself, I had just nothing. I was living equivalent of, I don't know, something like 50 euros of today per month. So I didn't need anything. I was wonderfully taken care, by my masters, but I could not do much. Then in 1997, I did this book with my father, Jean-François Revel, the monk philosopher. So maybe it was the beginning of my trouble, being changed my life in sense of getting exposed to, again, the West, which I didn't plan to come back really. And then, but also beginning of an opportunity, because I have no need for all those funds. So from the beginning, I decided to give 100% of all the royalties of the book, the income of the conference, of the photographies and all that, to some projects, and some other wonderful philanthropists and the people join us, and many people from all over the world. So slowly, we started about 40 projects in Tibet: schools, dispensary, bridges, elderly home, a clinic in Nepal, a clinic in India, in Bodh Gaya. And then gradually more and more people joined us. So we increased. Now I'm old and cannot take care of all that directly. So we have a wonderful team at Karuna Shechen. Many of them are located in France, but there's also branches in Hong Kong, in the US, in Canada, and many other places. And so now there are quite a few people working. Just in India, there are about 200 workers, doctors, teachers, motivation, people who motivate. They are wonderful people in the field taking care. They are a wonderful team in Paris, try to organize all that. And so just as it started with very small, with a few friends, going to Tibet and beyond that, and under the inspiration of Ramjam Rinpoche, we did 2 clinics in Nepal and India. But now, as to last year, even during the COVID, we helped 400,000 people in the field of health, education, social services, emergency services with the COVID, elderly people, disabled people, people who are day workers and had absolutely no food if they don't get jobs, and all kinds of interventions we have done. Just recently, we helped another 10,000 people in India, which were affected by the COVID. So, this is I'm so delighted to rejoice into that. And now I'm just sort of there, but it's thanks to all my friends and collaborators that this is happening. I'm not too active. I'm 75, and it's time to try to go back to translation and not to die in the airport, but hopefully doing some little bit of practice. I have to start from scratch, from the very beginning of the path. So I better hurry up. Time is now counted and limited. So no time to waste. I mean, there's never time to waste, but especially when you are young, you can guess, although there's no certainty at all that you will live sometime. When you're 75, that's it. Time is limited by nature. So you cannot fool yourself thinking I have whole life in front of me. You have a very, very little, and every day is a blessing if you use it for practice. Yes.
Thank you, Matthieu. I think that we would like
to... And then, sorry, you can go to the website, Karuna, which means compassion, of course, in Sanskrit, -Shechen, SHECHEN.org. And it's very easy to participate in that effort. And we have many, many people now who participate, even small, but part of the Karuna family. And I tell you that it really, really helps a lot. With very little, it goes a long way in India and Nepal to help and do something. So even very modest donation can do a lot to help someone. Yes.
Thank you, Matthieu. I think that we would like to take advantage of your precious presence with us today. And we would like to ask you a little thorny question, which I believe quite a lot of people is wishing to know your answer to. Okay. Because the stories included in the book, as well as the Tibetan culture in general, involve facts that may seem supernatural, namely the influence of divine beings, the existence of other worlds. These days, even rebirth is put into question, and so forth. Some people find those supernatural events difficult to digest. Since you are a practitioner and a scientist, your opinion about this tension is very valuable. So how do you think one should approach the supernatural phenomena in Buddhist culture that so far have not been explained scientifically?
Well, first of all, I'm not an authority on anything, but basically, if something happens, it's not supernatural. And if it doesn't happen, then there's no problem. So now, if it happens, first of all, did it really happen or not? We have to check. And then if it did, then we have to think, why, how? And of course, not everything is known, not everything is explained. There are many things which are, just people say that, we don't know. But some of those, there's uncontrovertible. Simply, if it happens, there must be some mechanism, there must be some explanation, there must be a cause. And of course, some of our knowledge is still limited. The science will not progress. Now, of course, among those which we can witness, there are, such, for instance, in Patrul Rinpoche's case and case of, my own root teachers, a case where they clearly knew someone else's mind. There's no doubt, absolutely no doubt about that. I've witnessed quite a few of those and heard so many of those stories. So I discussed that with my friend Wolfsinger, who's a great neuroscientist. And he said, well, he's not telling that everyone is telling lies, of course. But he said the problem is that this cannot be really put to the test of science because science needs to repeat things in controlled conditions. So you will have to put someone in a room 20 times and ask him, to try to find out what I'm thinking or what is in front of my eyes without that person being able to see. And then, so this kind of thing will never happen because those great masters who have those gifts, they don't make, they don't show off about that. They usually, if you ask them, they say, I know nothing. But he said, this is at the level of true life stories. But if many of those sort of accumulate, they start having a little more weight, the weight of the burden of proof. So, well, there are quite a few things, but everything basically comes down to what is the nature of consciousness. And that's a question that, no neuroscientist will say, we definitely know. Many of them think that as we progress, we'll find out that it's all in the brain, but none of them are there to say that now because this is where I don't have that knowledge. And then if you look at, if you discuss with philosophers, even Western philosophers, phenomenologists, they say, well, the main problem is that in order to speak about consciousness, you have to be conscious. So in a way, you cannot step out of consciousness to study consciousness. So it's a very long debate. Within the Mind and Life Institute, there was many debates with the Dalai Lama and scientists and contemplatives about this idea of consciousness. So, and then my late dear friend, Francisco Varela, he said, well, let's keep the question open because otherwise there's no way to progress, both in inner science and outer science. But there are so many compelling testimonies. And as Wolfsinger, my neuroscientist friend, who's actually I'm going to see him in a few days, said, if any of those is true, he said, we are in deep trouble because we have to revise the whole paradigm of reductionism, which is to say that everything is the working of the brain. So if there's such thing as mind reading, just that, forget about flying in the sky or other things. then we have to see things differently. But why not? This is how knowledge progresses, and none of those really authentic and I would say real scientists to the core, they will never say, "Oh, that's impossible." They just say, "Well, let's explore. We need to see how it works." So if you want to take the perspective of science, from the perspective of a living experiences, many of us had such experiences. So for them, there's no doubt. And we don't have to go around and shout in the world, "No, I've seen that, I've heard that." But this is a fact that we are confident in. And so that's good enough for inspiration for our practice.
Thank you, Matthieu. Your answer is very valuable. Now, if it's fine for you, and if we have time, we have a few minutes left, we can do a short Q&A session with a few questions from the people attending the event. Is it fine for you?
Sure, well, yes.
First question is, I understand that the Bodhisattva's life is dedicated to benefiting, to leading to the truth, as many sentient beings as possible. Do you really benefit more beings with a wandering life instead of staying as abbot of the monastery that was Patrul Rinpoche's? It seems that with a wandering life, you have less opportunity to contact people.
Well, in a way, if you look at the most inspiring figure that still today are inspiring people. People think immediately of life of Jesús Milarepa. They think of Patrul Rinpoche. Why? Milarepa lived in the 11th century. Patrul Rinpoche, yes, he didn't meet so many people. Sometimes he would teach to thousands of people the Bodhisattva, but then he will disappear. But what is their legacy? The legacy is first they achieve full realization. Then they are left a testimony in terms of their writing or their life story. The life of Jesús Milarepa, I know there's no collected works of Jesús Milarepa in 10 volumes or so, but his life story and his songs of spiritual realization that actually are teachings and tell parts of his life and meetings with others, they have incredible source of inspiration even today. And, when I translate the life of Shapka, many practitioners, this is a book that, it's not the kind of bestseller and you find in the railway station and all that. But so many practitioners said that gave them such an inspiration for their practice. The songs, the teachings, the life story. So, Patrul Rinpoche, why are we discussing Patrul Rinpoche today? Because of the quality of his enlightenment, his teaching, his example. Even if you think of Lord Buddha, when you go to Bodh Gaya, under the Bodhi tree today, 2,500 years after the Buddha's enlightenment, there are thousands of people paying homage. To what? To whom? Not to an emperor, not to a powerful head of state, not to a famous sportsman or singer, to someone who something happened within his mind, someone who went from ignorance to total perfect wisdom. That's what we are celebrating. But in a way, when the Buddha achieved enlightenment, he was alone for 40 days or so. He didn't say a word. Then he started teaching. But that enlightenment, the strength and the blessing of enlightenment is still now living in all the teachers, in all the lineage. And even the Buddha had not met many people, that it makes no difference. So it's not that you can fill up a stadium by singing a rock concert. If it doesn't help anyone, what's the point? Even Patrul Rinpoche maybe not have met so many people, but his legacy, his teaching, his life story are so powerful. And just his example, just to think of him and remember his life. So I think, well, it depends.
Thank you. Another question from someone that has been participating in the event is, what is the way to focus on the Dharma, especially in the West, because of our culture keeps so many distractions and we live with many economic and social concerns? So what is the way to focus on the Dharma, especially in the West with so many distractions and things to do?
Well, there's a word by the U.S. novelist and poet and writer, Henry David Thoreau. He said, simplify, simplify, simplify. So if you were to make a Buddhist commentary on that, that will be simplify your action. Don't engage in all those distraction things which are absolutely not necessary, hardly useful for your own life, not so much useful for others, and absolutely not useful to enlightenment. So get rid of all unnecessary action. Just do what is needed, what is beneficial, what benefits others and yourself, what contributes to the path, and also to sustain your life so that you can practice. Then simplify your words. I mean, how much useless chatter, these talk shows, this endless repeating of the news every 10 minutes, to repeat more or less the same thing all day long in 25 different channels. So much noise. Simplify our words, our conversation. And then simplify our minds. We're always torn, hope and fear, countless mental projections, endless mental fabrication. So just simplify all that. Then, we can somehow do what's really, really useful. And then try to live our life decently for others, for oneself. And then also we have to be motivated. I mean, you can only spend time doing something or progressing on the path if you see the benefit of it. Why should you do it otherwise? It's not like paying taxes or to the state or something, an obligation. It's something that you should see the benefit of, sort of being less engaged into worldly concerns, activities. If you enjoy and think it's great, well, maybe, you have to wait till there's a big suffering to turn your mind to the Dharma. But if you look carefully, samsara is not something we can fix. There's no 2.0 version of samsara, kind of nice, smooth working samsara. Samsara, one time or the other, you will fall onto hard times. But if we wait and wait and wait and wait and wait, and we till our deathbed, then we won't be able to practice so much. So we should think of our priorities, what really matters in life, and then decide. Nobody can force us or influence us. We just have to decide, and then find possibly the right teacher.
Thank you, Matthieu. Your words are really helpful. Okay, so we are very happy to have your wonderful presence with us today. And this interview is very interesting. But as you know, as Buddhism says, everything comes to an end. So this might be a good point to finish. Before giving the talk back to Pia, dear Matthieu, I want to thank you 1,000 times for your wonderful answers, for the great effort that you've put writing this and many other amazing books, and also for being such an exceptional model for many of us on how to be helpful for the Dharma and how to create a better world.
Well, it's very kind. I'm not none of these. I'm just a kind of like the donkey trying to run after the great stallions and the great horses of the Dharma. I'm just a disciple in the last day of my life. And I don't know why. I mean, somehow I happen to write books and things like that. I don't know if it's a good thing, but translations, of course, something very precious. Translating the oral teaching of the Khyentse Rinpoche, that's I'm so happy to have done that. And the photo books like the Journey to Enlightenment, the Life of World of Khyentse Rinpoche, and some other books which I showed images of my teacher like Khyentse Rinpoche, Dundrum Rinpoche, and others, and the Sonnet Dalai Lama. So I'm very grateful that I could just be a very humble instrument into sharing some of those things. So I'll try to, I feel very fortunate the life ahead. So I'll try to practice more and hopefully die in peace. We'll see. And thank you so much for inviting Zangar Rinpoche. It was such a fortunate time to see him again. He's so kind. It's such a reminder, of not fooling around. He has no tolerance for fooling around. So good lesson each time we meet him.
Thank you very much, Matthieu. From the deep of our heart, we really, I'm sure all of us, we have been inspired for the wonderful time together and through your book and through this conversation. And if you permit me so, I will change into Spanish now to give thank you to all the RIME team. I'm sure you will be happy because all this event has been possible thanks to a RIME spirit. We have been collaborating many different persons from different sanghas, from different teachers, from different communities, even different countries. Especially, I want to give thanks to the translators, in this case, Jordi Roig, who translated your wonderful book, and to Mireia Petrus, one of our principal translators also in this event in the simultaneous translation. Also, I want to thanks to Alaksenka Rinpoche and the translators of his precious video, Adam Percy and Roger Spell. And also I want to give all our thanks to Daniel Millet from Buddhist Door and is the editor from Buddhist Global, and to the Sakya Buddha family, Sakya Dharma family from Europe, especially Danijela Pian, who has helped us with all the technical Zoom and all these informatic problem issues that really nowadays are so important and so challenging to maintain us together as a community. And especially I want to emphasize this RIME spirit, because I think that having this community that is this community of practitioners that is united and working together, it's a live example that Buddha teachings are still alive within us, and is the best example that the Dharma is being preserved and expanding. No? Then it's our commitment and our responsibility as a community of Buddhist practitioners. Then thank you very much. Gracias. Now I will change the time.
So thanks to all of you for your participation. As you have been hearing through the simultaneous translation, I want to say thank you to this community of friends that has been able to organize this event under RIME spirit. Thank you also to the Coordinadora Catalana de Entitats Budistas with Pepe. They are always there when you need them. And thank you also to Josep from Samye Song and Joan Anton from their support, as well as Matthias and other members of the Sakya community. Thank you very much. And I also take this opportunity to dedicate the merit for the ultimate enlightenment of all sentient beings. This wonderful meeting that we share with you, Matthieu. Yes, yes.
Mingle our mind with Rinpoche's mind.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all. Bye-bye. See you. Go back to the forest now. Bye.
So thank to you all and see you next time.